Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Hall, and this week kicks off a flurry of shows recorded during FunkFest in Nashville, Tennessee. First up, it's Vinnie Cilurzo. He's the co-founder, co-owner, and brewer of Russian River Brewing Company in California. We'll be talking about the relationship between beer and wine, and then getting into a lively conversation about hops. But first, please go visit allaboutbeer.com. There you can find original articles, reviews, news, insights, and podcasts. You can listen to shows like Beer Travelers, Brewer to Brewer, and the All About Beer podcast simply by searching All About Beer wherever you listen to shows. This show and all of the work we do is supported by you. You can please visit patreon.com/allaboutbeer, where you can donate to help keep the content fresh. A few bucks really does go a long way to fund writers, photographers, creators, and editors. And if you'd like to learn more about advertising through All About Beer, please email info@allaboutbeer.com. I am writing this introduction about a week following FunkFest, the annual event held by Embrace the Funk and Yazoo Brewing, and I'm still feeling the warmth of the day. Not temperature-wise, mind you, but rather the good feeling that sprang forth from this low-key event filled with world-class beers. Brandon Jones and Linus Hall, two brewers that I've known for years, have put real thought into creating a tasting event that focuses on spontaneous fermentation, but makes way for other delightful beers. With copious amounts of food, a great soundtrack, and alternative drinks like coffee and kombucha, this brings together brewers who are passionate about the beers they make, tradition, and ingredients. It's easy, fun, and informative. Jones asked me to host a series of panels during the fest, casual conversations with leading brewers on a variety of topics, and it was my great pleasure to do so. And so first up is Vinnie Cilurzo of Russian River, who brought along two beers for the assembled audience to taste. While listening to people taste beer isn't always a lot of fun, especially after the fact, I imagine you, dear listener, will get a lot out of his stories behind these beers and a deeper understanding of the brewing science behind each one. Recorded at FunkFest 2023 before an enthusiastic crowd, here's our conversation. Sort of kick this off, tell us what is being poured right now and what you want people to know about this particular beer. As the crowd is now, the word is out that Vinny's pouring from his stash, and yeah, the word is coming out.
All right, so what we're pouring right now is a beer called pumice beer. I will probably have some after we can pour, but you guys are here, so thanks for coming out and listening. Pumice beer the base beer is our spontaneous fermented beer that we call Synambic. Synambic, because lambic is a protected phrase, if you will, in Belgium, style of beer. So Synambic is the word Sonoma, where we're located, and lambic contracted together. So base beer is Synambic, so it could be any number of vintages blended together. And then we're using what's called pumice. Pumice is the leftover grapes from a winery after they've pressed them, and that could be white or red pumice. In this case, it's Petite Syrah pumice from a local, long-time, multi-generation grape growing family in the Russian River Valley called Bajagalupe. They also have a wine brand as well. So this clocks in at 10.2% alcohol.
Okay.
It is purposefully still. There's no carbonation to it. And we're brewing with pumice isn't necessarily, we weren't the first ones to do it. I believe Garrett Oliver is pouring something with pumice today at the Brooklyn brewery booth. Firestone Walker has played with pumice before. This is the third time we've done it. First time we did it was in 2020. We did carbonate it, and what I thought when I tasted it was, this thing needs to be still. It needs to have no carbonation, and the whole idea was to really blur the lines between beer and wine. And we're in the middle of wine country. Natalie and I at Russian River, we've got 600 or 700 wineries within 50 or 60 miles of our brewery. We're a stone's throw from the Sonoma Valley, Dry Creek, Russian River, where they grow the best Pinot Noir in America. Carneros isn't far, and then we have Napa Valley over the hill. We have a saying about Napa. Napa is for auto parts. Sonoma is for wine and beer. So, Our friend Ron Capps, who races NHRA for Napa, we tell him like every year, if you ever win in Sonoma, you need to say that on national television. So anyway, so that really the idea was to add a whole lot of pumice, about 5 or 6 pounds of pumice per gallon of beer, to a base beer that was already put through barrels, soured, funked up, and then eventually removed that beer. It gets a beautiful color from the pumice. It's really amazing how much is left in those grapes even after the winery presses them. I grew up in a winery, so I know a lot about grapes and winemaking, but what really surprised me was that depending on what winery we get the pumice from, because we also do a Cabernet Sauvignon version of it, we've done Pinot Noir. What's unique is that it depends how much they pressed the pumice and what we get out of it. Because if they press it more, there's going to be less liquid in the fruit.
Yeah.
And so then you actually end up, a lot of that beer ends up staying in the pumice. So it takes more for a grape that's been pressed more.
Can you talk to me a little bit about the blending of beer and wine and working within a new style, or finding ways to have the two talk to each other in a way that is impactful, like this is in the glass? Like I know you approach your beers in analytical ways and creative ways. When you're playing with two different beverages, where does that conversation start, and then how does it evolve?
Yeah, that's one of the coolest things about this beer is that, and all fruit beers for that matter. So we'll consider this a fruit beer, a grape fruit beer. Is you have to think about the acidity of what the fruit is going to contribute, and then if you're using grapes, you need to think about the tannins that the grapes are going to contribute as well. So the tannins are that drying, puckering quality that you get from a big red wine, and we have to think this through, because when I'm going to do this, the winery has already put this through a fermentation. They're getting a lot of skin contact, particularly for a Petit Syrah, which is about as big of a wine as you can have. And there was a lot of thought put towards the variety that we chose as well. We've made pumice beers with something as light as Pinot Noir, which was way too light. It didn't have near the complexity. In fact, we never released it. A beer just got blended away into some other fruited beer. It wasn't bad in the sense that it wasn't good to drink, but it just didn't have the personality. So we're really kind of down to Cabernet and Pinot Noir. So I think one of the first things is acidity, and then second to that is the tannins for this beer, and then trying to figure it out. But at some point, you just have to go for it and do it and try it, because there's so few breweries out there making beers using pumice, that like the first year I was like, okay, this is good, but next year I'm going to add 30 or 40% more pumice, because this one just didn't quite hit the level.
Yeah.
So I've had other pumice beers before, and a lot of times they left a little like a desire for more contribution from the grapes, and that was the idea of where we took it to get to 6 pounds of pumice per gallon of beer, and the pumice is free, by the way. So we're taking a waste from a winery. Our friend Elias from Silver Oak Winery, because we do a Cabernet pumice beer with them. He goes to me. So we have these picking bins that hold about 1,000 pounds of pumice. And he's like, you only want 2 of them? He goes, I've got shit tons of these things. Like, take more. So they just take it and dump it in the vineyard, and it composts in the vineyard.
A beer's personality, I like that. And that's sort of one of those things where when you're doing it trial and error, when you're doing it year after year, it's going to speak to you in a way that you want to. And there are so few breweries that are doing pumice beers. After this was bottled and after you've been tasting this, what did you learn from this batch that you might apply to the future to help that personality grow a little bit more?
Yeah, we've hit a point on this one. There's the Petit Syrah pumice from where the grapes or the pumice came from Bacigalupe that I really like where it's at. So I think moving forward, it's to make sure that we don't pick a base beer that's too acidic, that has too high of a sour acidity content.
Yeah.
Because I really like where it's at. If it was a little bit higher, it wouldn't be the end of the world. If it was a little bit lower, it wouldn't be the end of the world. But I'm really happy where this is at. But I made that comment before about
so I, by the way, I wasn't like suggesting this is garbage, do better next year. It wasn't like one of those things.
Because I think a better example, although we don't have it here, is the Cabernet Sauvignon version that we haven't released it yet at the brewery, but it's super light. And that was my comment earlier, that some wineries press harder and they get more out of their grapes.
Okay.
And Silver Oak, Cabernet producer, does that. And so we just didn't get as much as I thought we would get from it.
Yeah.
So next year, I am going to take more pumice from Elias, the cellar master at Silver Oak, and probably double up what we did now. We'll have lower yields, but this isn't a beer that we make a lot of. It's a super labor-intensive beer. We have these 550-gallon cube tanks that we hand load. We scoop out of the bins and hand dump the pumice in, purge it with CO2, fill it with beer, and then at some point when we drain the beer out, we need to remove all that fruit as well. So super labor-intensive, but again, the whole vision of and goal of blurring the lines of what wine and beer could be. And, it's not going to... I think you could put this in front of someone and they would think it was wine. They're not going to think it's a Petit Syrah or a Cabernet.
Sure.
But it's every bit as full-bodied and tannic as a Gamay Beaujolais, or a French, lower alcohol French wine.
What is the most labor-intensive beer you make?
On the funky wild side, anything that gets fresh fruit like this is definitely labor-intensive. Probably that peach beer that we're pouring inside, if you haven't had it yet, because we get those peaches in, we hand cut them, so we have them, then we pit them by hand, and then they go into a bucket and they have to get weighed, and they get hand dumped into these cube tanks, and then it sits, and then by the end we've got to rake all the peaches out into a tippy dump, and then they go out to our compost bin. So that's probably it. And then on the non-funky side, it's probably Pliny the Younger. There's just a crap ton of hops, tons of dry hopping. Yields suck, but the result is magical.
I want to talk about hops in a minute and your IPAs, because I know that's what you talk about a lot. I'm always struck when I'm drinking your beers from the wild side of the brewery, that the acidity is always... I'm not... perfect isn't the right word, but it's appropriate. And it's not stripping the enamel off my teeth. I'm not hunting for it. You found... I don't even know if balance is the right word either. And I'm struggling to find the right words to say this. But acidity is one of those things where... I feel like in the last 10 or so years, as more people have added on wild programs, they almost did what craft did in the early days, whereas we've had beer for 50 years that have had zero flavor. We are going to do all of the flavor. We are going to do all of the hops. And we went through the IBU wars and everything. And I feel like there are breweries that are approaching acidity in their beers that same way, where it's just dialed way off the charts.
Yeah.
What would you like to see as far as acid in beers, acid content in beers across the board, or for brewers to pay more attention to, or for drinkers to be thinking about?
Yeah, I'm with you. I like a softer acidity. I love when you talk to a lambic brewer. In Belgium, they kind of get mad at you if you tell them like sour beer. Like they don't want to hear you say sour, because a well-made lambic goose is very soft on the palate. And And so we kind of strive for that. We certainly had our years where our acidity had crept up. And I think one of the things three things I attributed to. One, we dump a barrel if there's ever any acetic acid. Acetic acid would be the balsamic vinegar quality. Even if there's a hint of it, we dump the barrel and we get rid of it. We're in a little bit better position than most brewers making wild beer because we have so many wineries and winemaker friends. And, if we were in the middle of America, it'd be a lot harder to get barrels. I can literally drive our forklift to 4 different wineries that are on our block. So, and some of them we do get barrels from. So that's one thing. 2, over the years, and a lot of times breweries get knocked for growing. But one of the things that happens when you grow is you tend to get better equipment. And like our barrel room now is a solid 58 degrees always. It's never a different temperature. I know there are some, even some lambic brewers that like that rise and fall because there's talk about the wood contracting and kind of the going back and forth. And I personally don't prescribe to that. I want a solid 58 year-round in our barrel room, and it's always that temperature, and I think that really controls the acidity. But I think another unique thing for us is that our bacteria culture, so we always buy Brett. We're often buying Brett from different suppliers, but our bacteria, we've never bought a culture of Brett since, I think, 2008. So we'll take the dregs of our Synambic, our spontaneous barrels, and then we'll grow that up. And our natural native yeast that sours that beer naturally is very soft and subtle. So that has now become our house culture for everything: temptation, supplication, consecration, the peach beer.
When are you making procrastination?
I'll tell you tomorrow. So anyways, those 3 things really drive, I think, a soft acidity, but I think temperature has a lot to do with it. We interestingly pitch our Brettanomyces based on cell count, but we pitch bacteria based on taste. So, and how old the barrel is. We clean our barrels with 160 Fahrenheit water at about 1,000 PSI through a pressure washer. And so we're definitely not getting all the bacteria out of the barrel. So the longer we use a barrel, the less bacteria we'll pitch to it. And to know how much we're going to pitch, it's basically a mathematical equation in the head that's not too scientific. And then we're just going to taste our sour stock, our bacteria stock. And if it's less acidic, we'll add a little bit more. If it's more acidic, we'll vice versa.
And that's that personality as well of trying to.
And I think that's why I'm the only one that touches these beers. I mean, I make all those decisions myself. It's still my favorite thing to do in the brewery. Is do all the wild, funky beers. It absolutely is.
I think things are starting to shake out, and I wasn't trying to be too disparaging to the brewers that are putting out, just straight acid, or acid reflux to everybody who goes near it. But where do you see, or where would you like to see this category, this style, go overall with beer these days?
Yeah, I was hoping this would come up.
Okay.
I know we agreed last night you weren't going to tell me any of the questions, and I was hoping you'd bring this up because there was a time when, and it wasn't that long ago, when there was a lot more breweries that were getting into wild, funky, sour production, and when you come to an event like this, these are some of the breweries that are left after a lot of breweries came and went, and I'm not talking about quick sour beers, and nothing wrong with those the beers.
Kettle sours, that kind of thing.
Yeah, nothing wrong with those beers, but I'm talking about true, classic, funky wild barrel beers, and it's a lot of breweries have come and gone, and there was a lot of breweries making too tart, too acidic, too acetic, too much balsamic vinegar, and it's nice that it's kind of contracted back to those that really are doing it, because let's face it, I mean, talk to almost anyone here today that's a brewer, these beers aren't just flying off the shelves. This is a really tough category right now, and we see it at Russian River. In fact, I mean, we're fully committed to this style. Temptation, Supplication, Consecration. We still sell a lot of our 3 base wild funky beers, but we're repurposing a part of our funky brewery right now and converting it into lager, what we're calling Lager House, and it's like 6,000 or 7,000 square feet. Honestly, though, what it is it's more of a correction that I overbuilt the funky brewery in the first place and should have just taken the barrel room that is our funky brewery now.
Yeah.
That should have been the only square footage. So we're just kind of making a course correction, and we're installing 250 barrel lagering tanks to make more Velvet Glow and STS and going deeper into the lager. But it also is just helping us refocus on our funky production. And so, I hope that breweries recognize the softness of acidity, and also those that are doing it, that they don't walk away from it if they're committed to it. Because there is a market out there. It's just a smaller market of folks that want to drink these beers and are willing to pay a little bit more for a beer that's taken 1, 2, 3 years to make.
Yeah.
And it's no different than wine pricing at all. So,
do the 3 categories, if focusing on the lager program now, or expanding it, being known for your IPAs and your hop forward beers, and then also having your wild funky side as well. Is there a Venn diagram that exists for consumers of all 3, or are they kind of siloed? Are they, do people who all, go for STS, they've never, they'll never drink one of your wild and sour beer? How does, because it's 3 very different things.
Yeah, they are totally different. I honestly don't know the answer to that question. I do know that most of our lager production is a pretty hoppy Pilsner. It's dry hopped a little bit. It's kind of an Italian Pils, if you will. So it's not your everyday super mild. So I think we have people jumping around drinking all these styles. I think what's unique for us is that we're in the middle of wine country. We sell most of our beer in the Bay Area. And so because of that, we have a lot of wine drinkers. And so these beers speak to a wine drinker, and it's a great crossover for anyone here, any brewery here that's working with a restaurant as well that might be selling these beers to a restaurant, because they can that restaurant can sell this as a wine alternative or just a cool crossover between the 2 products. And Natalie and I were at the California Craft Beer Summit a few weeks ago and speaking there and just hanging out, and Bart Watson from the Brewers Association made this comment about that, people are, I've always said this, that craft beer drinkers are actually very promiscuous. They'll drink wine, they'll drink cocktails, whatever else, kombucha, cider, and so you can't, as a brewer, think that a consumer's only going to drink beer or only going to drink wild funky beer. And so as a business owner, Natalie and I have these 3 silos, if you will: IPA, funky wild beer, and then Pilsner, and then technically you could say a 4th, because we've always made Belgian beer at least since 1999. There's another style that sells even worse these days than funky wild beer, but we keep making it because we love it.
Yeah,
and we're very fortunate. We have this beer, Pliny the Elder, that pays the electric bill, and it's a big part of our volume, and so it allows us to play in all these other arenas. Admittedly, I have a charmed life. I've been covering beer for 20 years. I get to have conversations like this and share them with folks. And occasionally I get emails, and I'm a fairly jaded guy, but as most reporters and journalists are. But 3 days ago, I get an email from Vinnie as we start to talk about this. And he said, "My original thought that this is a funky fest, so we should discuss something funky related. But another option would be for me to overnight a few cases of Pliny the Elder. And we could pour 4-day-old Pliny the Elder
which is now being pulled out, that was overnighted and bottled 4 days ago. And then we could discuss the modern history of IPA in America, what it was like in the early years, hop selection, difficult to sell, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I get this email when I wake up. It's about 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'm texting Jones. I live on the East Coast, so 4 o'clock in the morning for him being like, do you see this email? Vinny wants to overnight some Pliny. I think that's all right for Funk Fest, right? And
I don't know. It's called Funk Fest. I didn't know there was like... I mean, for God, okay, Funky, there's an Orval booth here, too, if you didn't see that. Like, oh. Yeah, it's 4 day old. It was bottled on Tuesday.
Yeah. Bottled on the 2nd of May.
Yeah.
How important is freshness with IPA?
Yeah, it's the most important thing. There's nothing more important in IPA than freshness. There's all kinds of internal things at a brewery. TPO, total package oxygen. That's nothing that a consumer would ever know about or hear or see or whatever. That helps drive freshness. But you as a consumer should never buy an IPA that's not kept cold at the store, period. I don't care what brewery it is.
Full stop, yeah.
It should always be kept cold. We have written into all of our distributor contracts that they must keep it cold. Most of our trucks ship cold. Maybe there's a distributor an hour away that doesn't because it's that close. But, when we ship the beer out here for it's CBC, Craft Brewers Conferences happening this week, it got shipped cold. It's the backbone of anything IPA, period.
What do you see as the state of IPA in America right now? I mean, you've been doing this long enough. You've created trends. You've led conversations. Where do you think we are?
Natalie and I are, as I said before, we're in the middle of wine country. So we think of a lot of things that are wine related. I think of IPA as the Chardonnay of beer now. It's so ubiquitous. Like, yes, there are a lot of wineries that don't make Chardonnay, but it's still the number one wine grown, produced, poured, bought in America. And IPA is that way for craft beer. And you have different iterations of Chardonnay. You have Chardonnay that's got malolactic fermentation and some that don't, some that are heavily oaked and some that aren't. And you have French styles that are more like Chablis that are unoaked and non-malolactic is what I like. And that's the same thing with IPA now. I feel like you've got all these different iterations of it, but I don't think IPA is going anywhere. And nothing's going to knock it off anytime soon. That's for sure. The consumers have really taken to it. And I remember when I made the first double IPA, and then I was making Blind Pig IPA initially back in '94 at my first brewery in the mid-'90s. You couldn't give IPA away. And if you would have told me then that IPA was going to be what it is now, that it's like 35 or 40% of all craft beer, I would have told you were freaking nuts. Because it was just, Sierra Nevada Pale Ale was a hard enough sell for Sierra Nevada at the time.
1980, yeah.
And we were the next level up, and that's why we didn't make a pale ale, was because of Sierra, and they did sell a lot in Southern California already. So yeah, it's crazy to see how consumers have shifted their palate to as much hops as we now put in, and it's gotten even more. I just brewed on our pilot brewery a couple days ago. I rebrewed Inaugural Ale, which is the first iteration of double IPA that I made in 1994, and it's funny because it's such a mild hop load.
Yeah, walk us through what was bold back in 94. Yeah.
So 1.5 pounds per barrel was the dry hop load.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's like innovative, yeah.
That's like that, what you're trying to do, tickle me?
Yeah.
A little Cheech and Chong moment. So I think that was Cheech and Chong.
Yeah.
Was that Up in Smoke or no? So, hey, I'm from Sonoma County, right? A lot of cannabis is growing there. It was way more front-loaded with hops, like 3 times as much hops for the bitterness.
Okay.
And but the one unique thing for us was, yes, there was a little crystal malt in it, but it was just a small amount. A lot of breweries that came after us making West Coast IPA used a lot more crystal malt, and they prescribed to the idea that it was like a hoppy barley wine, which I never did. So the inaugural ale had a little C15 in it, maybe like 3 or 4%, and then our regular IPA had like 3% C40.
Okay.
But definitely West Coast style. There was no hazy IPA back then.
Do you make a hazy?
Yeah, we do. It's called Mind Circus, and it's not a huge. It's less than 1% of our production. I'd call it a West Coast hazy. It's quite bitter and hoppy, and my personal opinion, my brewer friends can take this however they want, but I think most hazy IPAs are too sweet, and they have too much calcium chloride added to it, which adds mouthfeel and body. And to me, they're hard. What I love about West Coast IPA or a good pale ale or a good Pilsner, or a good lager, or whatever, is that drinkability and the bitterness is what brings you back wanting more. And I've heard far too often in the recent years that I don't like bitterness that much. And I personally think for a while now there's been kind of an assault on bitterness, from brewers, and they're not. For me, I rationalize bitterness as that it's part of mouthfeel and drinkability, and it leaves you wanting more. It's a great Pilsner, a great Helles. Has a really crisp bitterness. Last year we had our German hop supplier IGN visiting us after the Firestone Walker Festival, and we were drinking our Helles, and they were like, this needs to be like 3 or 4 or 5 BUs more. And Garrison, our head brewer, and I were like, really? And we've little by little and taken it up, and it's like, man, they're right. It's so much more drinkable now. So we're like taking our own advice.
When you talk though about the growth of IPA, and I think it's important to note that like there are clear beers that have pronounced bitterness, the West Coast style, that are still doing really well and enjoyable to drink, but hazy is running the show these days and steering the conversation, and that lack of bitterness, the focus on the juicy, the focus on the guava puree that goes into it. Have you ever thought about putting guava puree in this, by the way? What's that? Jones and I had a bet if I was going to ask that question or not, but that's for those of you listening, Vinny has just gotten up. He's walked away. He's mad.
It's all good. It's all good. I can take it.
Do you get a lot of suggestions from people who are dumb like me saying, like, have you ever thought about messing with
You should make a hazy Pliny.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we get it all the time. Yeah.
What would that look like? Or what would that taste like?
I will admit that I once pulled John Kimchick from Alchemist, Teddy Topper maker in Vermont.
Yeah.
Once was out visiting. He goes, man, I would love a keg of hazy Pliny. So I kegged 5 gallons and force carbonated it and overnighted it to him. So he's the only one that's ever had it.
Wow.
So,
that's
it was fun because John was there talking about, this is like probably 8 years ago when it was before the hazy movement had really exploded. And so you kind of had Pliny and Hetty on this pedestal of West Coast and hazy. And Natalie was the only one there. And we just had this amazing conversation. And we were drinking beers from the tank and just comparing our process of hazy and a West Coast clear. And it was amazing how different the process is and how we dry hop temperature and that sort of thing.
So on the topic of bitterness, though, you hear, you can't appreciate the sweet without the bitter, like when you're talking about life, and I think that's true with food, and it's important. But there are scores of beer drinkers these days, not even craft beer drinkers, but beer drinkers these days, who have flocked to the hazy style because they like that fruitiness to it. They like some of these New World hops, that tropicalness to it. And then when you put a beer like this in front of those serious modern IPA drinkers, there's that recoil thing that I think, was probably also happening when Sierra Nevada was putting out a 32 IBU pale ale 40 years ago. So you must think about this, right? How do you have that conversation with those modern beer drinkers that have been raised on the hazy style that they hear the word bitter and they get maybe a little spooked?
I'm a firm believer that, and not just us, it could be any producer, that you don't have to be all things to everyone. And like Pliny is bitter. We've never shied away from it. It's always been that way. It's always had a really firm, crisp bitterness. It's always quite dry as well. And so like, if you don't like it, that's fine. Like, I have no problem with it. And I, that's what makes craft beer so cool, is that there is like something for everybody now, especially now. Like, if you want banana in your beer, there's someone out there that puts banana, coconut, all that weird stuff. It's not what we do. As Natalie says, we make beer-flavored beer for the most part, couple fruit beers. But I do. I just take it back to as simple as, like, if you don't like it, that's fine. There are plenty of other beers out there, and that's okay. It does make me cringe when I hear brewers talking about, like, finishing gravities of like 4 and 4.5 Plato. Pliny finishes at about 2.5 Plato. So for those of you that don't know, that is just a measurement of sweetness, of sugar, residual of sugar content in the beer. And there's this great term, this great idea in Belgium, and it says that your beer is digestible. And what it means is that you can drink a lot of beer and basically wake up the next day without a hangover and go to work. And so I've always, subscribed to that mindset of a drinkable beer that's digestible, and even at 8% alcohol, it's like Duvel, Belgian beer. It's super dry. It's 8.5% alcohol, but you drink a few of those, you can still wake up the next day and feel pretty good as long as you drink a little bit of water.
Just a little bit, yeah.
But and on Pliny's 8%, and not that we're saying
this is 8%.
Yeah.
All right.
It's the art of
where I live.
The art of hiding the alcohol. Yeah. And Pliny the Younger is 10.25%, and a part of that balance is finding hops that are really fruity, and so some of this really comes down to hop selection and finding the exact same lot of hops. A lot of brewers have the opportunity and privilege to go to the Pacific Northwest and do hop selection every year and select your lot of hops. And some brewers want something new every year. They want it to be totally blind, and I'm just the opposite. I want the same farms. It may be a different lot, but I want the same farm every year if I can. And so we buy our Simcoe from 3 different suppliers. 2 of those are direct contracts, so I know that one of them is Peralt, one of them is Carpenter, then the rest of it comes from Yakima Chief. But I specifically love that I know that I'm going to get Carpenter and Peralt, and even their worst is better than 99% of the Simcoe out there.
Yeah.
And we're you talked about you're privileged with your job. We're privileged that we have that opportunity to go do hop selection at these farms direct. We're the only brewery that's allowed to do Simcoe selection direct at these farms.
Really?
And they select the best of their best lots. And
that's a bragging right for them as well, though.
And we love it. Yeah. And we have these relationships. And like, we ran into Brad Carpenter in the airport yesterday coming in. He was coming in from Seattle, and it was like, these are like our family. And it helps us. And it's really odd because sometimes they'll put the same lot or the same field in from year to year, and then we select blind. And we'll select the same field multiple years in a row. Steve Peralt's always like, yeah, that field 13 or whatever it is. He's like, you pick that every year. Like, that's crazy how you do that. So that to me drives consistency in our beers, knowing that we can get a lot of times the same field, or at minimum the same farm, knowing that their farm practices are the same.
Because consistency is... That's, I think, with West Coast IPAs at least, and beers like this, the consistency has to be there. I feel like with hazies, there's still a lot of people who are either messing around with it, or it doesn't have to be perfect, or it doesn't have to be because you're able to hide some flaws and you're able to it's just not, the quality isn't always there that I would like to see. But it's so critically important for beers like this. And I think one of the reasons that you all have been successful is that consistency to it and that commitment to it.
Yeah, it's we spend so much time on this beer. We stress about it. We worry about the freshness, the stability of it. We worry about, how to keep it relevant. And we're so committed to the making it the betterment of it. We do make tweaks on this recipe all the time. You'd be shocked at how often we make minor tweaks, but there's always a through line of 2 hop varieties, Simcoe and Amarillo.
Yeah.
And we're building other hops around it to try to just keep making it a better beer. And I can't see anything more to that question other than Natalie and I lose sleep over it.
Yeah.
That's what Mind Circus references is when you lay at bed at 4 a.m. and your little hamster wheel is running in your head and you're like, whatever your worry is, whether it's kids or work or school and that's literally where the term Mind Circus came from our friend Dave, who owns the Toronado beer bar in San Francisco. And but we Mind Circus over Pliny so much to try to keep it relevant, and because we know we have something special with it, and and we know that it can turn on a dime, and that we could lose that credibility that we've worked really hard to establish. But that kind of goes back to your first question about freshness.
Yeah,
is that our sales team, our brand ambassadors have been known to walk into an account and see even like 10-week-old, 12-week-old Pliny and just lay down their Russian River credit card and buy everything off the shelf and take it out of there because it's not fresh enough.
Yeah.
So, but we've always believed in the bottling date and not a Best By date. We're early adopter of that, and let the consumer decide. And I think every brewery, that's another thing about IPA that I didn't mention. If you're buying IPA that doesn't have a bottled on date, you shouldn't buy it. Every IPA, and honestly, and everyone in the industry knows that I'm not the biggest fan of cans. We do canned beer, but
I wasn't going to ask you the question.
Cans of
everybody wants to know. I know that Pliny has been
double dry hop and Pliny for President has been in cans, and we're going to do Pliny for President again. We've never canned regular Pliny before.
I know that to be not true.
We canned one crowler
on the Sierra
Nevada Beer Camp bus. You are absolutely right.
A benefit.
That's true.
It's happened once.
Yeah. But cans have honestly given the brewer a little bit of an out, because 99% of the cans, the canning date's on the bottom, and most consumers don't grab the can and look at the bottom of the can. Whereas like most breweries that bottle, not that there's many of them anymore, it's on the label like ours is. And so I think cans have given the breweries a little bit of an out. And I don't think consumers look as much.
Yeah,
I always do.
No, I do too.
Yeah, I'm critical, and a lot of times you flip the can over and the canning date is smudged.
Oh yeah.
Which is like, well, that's just as good as not having a canning date on it. So.
I wish we could keep going with this. Garrett Oliver's up next in just a minute.
You don't want to hold Garrett up.
No.
Can I tell a quick Garrett Oliver story?
Oh yeah, please.
Those are left. So Garrett and Natalie and I are very close friends. Garrett's one of our best friends in the industry, and we communicate a lot. He's just a dear friend in person, and I highly suggest that you go use the bathroom, grab a beer, whatever, come back. But we, for years, have talked about wanting to go to Belgium together. So we do this collaboration every 5 years with Cantillon and Allagash, where we blend our spontaneous beers. So event got delayed because of COVID. So last year, the event was finally going to happen. And Garrett, Natalie, and I were going to do our Belgium trip in 2020 or 2021, and I guess 2020, and then it got postponed to 2022. So we go and do our Belgium trip. And 2 days before the end of the trip, and we're actually out in Florenville visiting Orval, and we had dinner that night with Jean-Marie Rock, the former head of production at Orval, who's an old friend of ours. And I start feeling this scratch in the throat that night, and I wake up the next day and take the test, and lo and behold, I get the Belgian version of COVID. So which actually moves through you faster because it ferments harder, warmer. It's got a higher ester content, more phenolics to it. Within 3 days, I was back drinking Taurus Boba, and then Natalie was a couple days behind me. But anyways, so we had to cut our trip short. But so Garrett had just had COVID, so he was bulletproof. So for the first couple days, Garrett took care of us. So if you know anything about Garrett, he eats well, he drinks well, dresses well. If anyone's going to take care of you when you have COVID, it's Garrett fucking Oliver. So.
Thank you for doing this. Thanks, everybody. It's
my thanks again to Linus and Brandon. Questions, comments, concerns, you can email me. It's John Hall. That's JOHNHOLL at allaboutbeer.com, or you can tell me about it on Twitter at John_Hall. A reminder, go visit allaboutbeer.com. There you can check out the podcast page, the merch page, and can read great new content as well as the archives going back to 1979. You can follow All About Beer on social media at All About Beer. And if you're interested in supporting journalism in the beer space, and really I hope you are, email us at info@allaboutbeer.com or go to patreon.com/allaboutbeer. Don't forget, All About Beer has a podcast channel now. Search and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. Steal This Beer has new episodes every Monday, and the BYO Nano podcast comes out on the 15th of every month. For you smoked beer fans out there, check out This Week in Rauch Beer. The Facebook group is easy to search, and on Twitter and Instagram, we are at TW Rauch Beer. As for this show, Nate Schweber does the music, Jeff Quinn designed our logo, and I'm John Hall. New episodes release every Wednesday, and that's when I'm going to be back again to drink beer and to think beer.